All right, let's start with the intro, and then
Yes.
hopefully we'll get to that 1,000 mark before we get to slide one. Hey, let's jump into it. So this is welcome to our third session now of the Data Mesh Book Club. This session is focused on part 4 of the book, and so we just went through part 3. Hopefully, you've had a chance to listen to that. In part 4, we kind of get deeper into data products. And so my name is Adrian Estala. I'm your host, together with Andy Mott. Andy, Captain Mesh himself. You may have seen him on TV or in videos or in person at a number of European events discussing data mesh. So happy to have you, Andy.
Thank you very much, Adrian.
As we jump into it, first and foremost, this is part of a LinkedIn community. And so if you haven't already joined our Data Mesh Book Club, we kind of invite you to do so, right? We encourage you to do so. The conversations we have in that community are helpful. They're useful. The chats, if you will, allow us to kind of get deeper into some of the topics that we maybe don't have enough time. We have an hour, but believe me, it's not nearly enough time to kind of get into all the different areas. And I know sometimes people can ask questions and we don't get through all the questions. So the chat group on LinkedIn is the best way for us to continue to communicate. So there's a code there, a QR code there you can download or take a look at, take a picture with your camera, and then you're able to kind of get into that very quickly. All right. There is a note here. We don't have any polls today, Andy. What happened? You dropped the ball in the polls?
Pretty much. Yeah.
No, that's okay. We don't probably have any times for the polls today, but we can certainly, we'll make sure we try to pay attention to questions.
Yeah. Let's see if we can get some questions in the Q&A. Yeah. And obviously, if we don't get to questions and things in the Q&A, or if people have questions that they want to ask afterwards, then obviously the Data Mesh Book Club LinkedIn group is a good place to post some stuff.
Absolutely. Now, I was kind of looking forward to this session because, as you and I both know, oftentimes when we talk about data mesh, we start with data products. Data products are it's not even arguable. I think data products it's definitive. Our data products are the most important element of a data mesh. You measure value, you're going to start with data products. And so I'm excited to talk about it. As I say that, there are some elements in the next couple of chapters that we're going to go through that are pretty deep, that are areas that may not be realistic or practical for some of us today, but they're interesting because if you think about how I might leverage or how I might use that in the future, that's kind of creates a vision. So we're going to cover what the book says in terms of what we can do and what the vision looks like, and we're going to try to balance that as we always do with what we're actually seeing from a practical perspective. So let's jump right into it. We're going to cover chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14, right? And so we'll jump right into chapter 11. I'm not sure, Andy, about the word affordance. I know that Zhamak in the book, she defines where that came from, and I can't remember what the exact quote is, but she mentions an academic, I think, book or an article or something where they describe affordances, and I think it's probably a good framework to use. But it's not a word I would use every day in my workshops or my design sessions. What it affords, what a data product. I think it's what we're talking about is what a data product delivers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but affordance is like, kind of caught me off guard initially. I was trying to figure out what we meant. So when I talk about data products, I'll talk about what they deliver. I'll talk about what you can expect from a data product. We're not talking about affordance.
So yeah, I just agree with that, actually.
You like the word affordance?
No, I'd agree with your commentary. I talk a lot to people who are sort of thinking about data products, and this whole concept of discoverability, addressability, trustworthiness, all that sort of stuff. That seems to be kind of top of mind, right? And I think that these are the things that Zhamak calls out as affordances, which are actually principles of interaction, I believe is where the quote comes from. But I think, just as you said, right, actually the starting position, I think, should be what's the value and who cares, right? That I think is the most important bit, right? And I do think that we get tied up with affordances when actually what's the value and who cares is probably the first question we should ask.
Okay.
So.
I pulled this quote on page 193. I love it. I might even just start putting this in all my presentations. The underscored part there, each data product is designed to be self-sufficient and affords its users and developers with all the capabilities they need to do their job. That's ambitious. That is incredible. That's what we're trying to deliver, I think, with a data product, but it's a strong statement. I think it's a great way to kind of start this chapter and start this part 4 of the book. to me, that the most important part there is self-sufficient. And
Yes.
if we build them right, and you're a consumer, you have everything you need to run. You have everything you need to go.
Yeah, so that self-sufficient piece, I thought you might dwell on that, because that's where we have our bit of a I think this leads us into the disagreement we have around sort of data products and in actual implementation, where you've got a view that actually you probably have one layer of data products, and I've got a view that you probably have a pipeline which consists of data products as kind of modules. And actually, if you read this sentence, then it suggests that you're correct, although I think you're wrong. But that self-sufficiency, right? It kind of alludes to the fact that the data product doesn't depend on another data product. And I would suggest that actually, in the way that I interpret data mesh, I think it does. So that's interesting. I hadn't, until you'd said that, that hadn't crossed my mind.
Well, and these the points that come out: discover them, understand them, use them, build them, govern them, and debug them. That's what this whole part 4 is all about, is how we do all of that. So it sets the stage perfectly, I think, for what we're about to talk about. All right, let's jump into the next piece. This is another quote that I think, and I think you pulled this one out. I also kind of highlighted it. The kind of notion of designing for value, right? It has to create value for its consumers, right? I like that part, that's the least amount of friction at its heart, where emotions at its heart, right? So I love the literary approach there, but yeah, it's the least amount of friction, right? Create value with less friction.
So I'm going to go with so I agree with this, actually. I'm talking to a CDO who's on his data mesh journey. One of the reasons why they've kind of gone down this route of data mesh and the technologies they've chosen was all about making it so easy to use the data product that people wouldn't do something else. And I think that's kind of at the heart of this statement, right? It's not just, in my opinion, it's not just the least amount of friction. It's the kind of the smallest, or I don't know, maybe I'm saying the same thing, but it's like zero friction compared to relative to any other approach. And I think that's really important, right? So and I've mentioned value before, because if you don't build something that someone cares about, no one's going to use it. But it has to be so easy to use that they really have no other option. I think that's actually really interesting and important as well. And I think that has lots of implications when we think about tech.
This last part is the second part that I've highlighted there. I'm focusing on where it says least number of steps, checks, and interventions. That's a part that I think a lot of us are going to or are already having problems with. We are, okay, so one is that we all agree with least number of steps. No one's arguing with that. When then you say, okay, least number of checks and interventions. We want to govern. We want to micromanage. We want to handhold the consumer through every step. But the reality is, what happened to that agreement of the autonomous, right? What happened to that frictionless, right? You have, in some sense, in your data mesh journey, at some point, you kind of have to let it go, and you have to less checks, less interventions, let those domains work on their own. I'm not saying no governance. I'm saying minimal governance, or I'm even better, I'm saying right size governance for each domain. But I really like, highlighting the piece of least number of steps, checks, and interventions, right? Don't micromanage your data products or your domains. Let them be self-managed. That's hard. That is hard. And
it
the
is hard.
InfoSec guys in the room may disagree with me.
On the flip side of that, if you think about federated computational governance, and if you get that correct, then to some degree, I'm not sure this is that important, right? Because if you get that right, then the governance almost becomes transparent. So I, as a data product owner, creator, I should be able to kind of select the checks that get applied to my data product, right? But that's all, right? So I'm not responsible for the actual checks themselves, or for the definitions of the checks, or the implementation, or the execution of those checks. So to some degree, if you get federated computational governance correct, then actually I'm not sure this is as important.
I think you're spot on. I think that's a really good point, because it's the way it feels to that consumer, right? They're like, I can't believe they're giving me all this access. I can't believe I can see all these data products. I can't believe it's this easy. But behind the scenes, Oh, by the way, we've hidden the data you're not allowed to see. Oh, by the way, we audit every query you run. Oh, by the way, we know where you take the data and what you do with it. And so there is a lot of observability behind the scenes, computational, federated computational governance behind the scenes that allows us to control what's happening to the right degree for that domain. But what it feels like for that consumer is that all they have is guidelines and they can run, so to speak. So yeah, that's a really good point. I was ambitious with this slide, Andy. I like the image you selected, and then I tried to put the table to the right of it. Yeah. And as I look at it now, the text is way too small. So, but I think this is table 11-1, if I'm reading that correct in the top left. If you got your book open, you can kind of turn to the page and kind of read the details there. This is a great, I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this image here was about affordances. Again, not the word I would have chosen, but I get it, right? It's what we're expecting from a data product. The table on the right describes every one of those areas. We probably don't have time to go through every one of them, but maybe pick one or two, Andy, you'd like to kind of cover, and maybe I'll do the same.
So I guess one that is probably top of mind is probably discoverability. So the discovery affordance, I guess. So that's one that it's probably worth having a bit of a conversation about. That's probably the one out of all the others. I mean, managing lifecycle is really important. I think there's a lot to that. I think that's probably hard, and I think we could discuss that one quite in depth. But actually discovery, right, and what the data product needs to have, what affordances it needs to have to make it discoverable by end users or by the data product consumers.
Yeah, I maybe the big for me aha if I were that I would point out is this is when we start thinking about a data product, this is different. This is what's different, right? The way that we're used to treating data or using data, we take tables or sets or fields or whatever, and we don't really manage the data or care for data in the right way. And then we throw it over the fence and we wait till hear that it lands and hope that somebody yells and they're happy, or yells because they're mad, but we don't take care of data. What we're talking about here is taking care of data, right? It's not just about collecting it and serving it. Those are important parts, but it's also about observing what happens with it, right? It's also about governing it. It's also about making sure that we put it together in the right way with that transformation. So we talk about data, curating good, valuable data products. You have to think about all these different parts. And if you do it right, then you're able to deliver that frictionless, high value solution to that consumer. This next section is also, I think, again, a lot of the same themes, right? This is part 4, and a lot of the same themes kind of carry throughout. And so let's dig into how the next section kind of dives into the same topics a bit further. Here we introduce the word, and I'm going to mess it up now. I had to Google it, right? Bitemporal, right?
Bitemporal.
For a second there, because I said it wrong, and I was like, what? And I was like, oh, because I used to bi and temporal, right? So I was like, okay, I got two things, and then I've got time, two times, two. And so I raise your hand in the group if you had to Google the word and really try to understand what we're trying to do here. But I'm happy we got the definition there for you. But yeah, I struggled with that one for a little bit. I had to think a lot about what this actually meant. I mean, what's your view on this bitemporal data and how important it is for data products?
So this is a big question in my opinion. So I think there are times when bitemporality is really important, right? And bitemporality for me is the time that an event occurs, where we are capturing some data around that event, and then the time that we are processing that data in some way, querying it or transforming it or whatever. And there are two times. And when we get into bitemporalization, there's things like immutability of data, so how the data was at a point in time, we probably don't ever want to change.
You're just speak a little louder, and I think.
Oh, sorry. Let me come over here. I'm walking around my room. So, so I think there's this view that when we're looking at historic data, right, we have an event that occurs, and then at some point we process the data, and it may be that when that event occurred, we captured the data incorrectly, right? So that's another record, right? And we may process that at a different time. But what we can now start to sort of say is, doesn't matter when we processed it, we could process a year ago or today, the data looked how it looked at that point in time, right? At the point in time the event occurred. And there's these kind of, this is why we have kind of two time dimensions essentially. And I do think it's important to have a view of a state at a point in time, right? So if we think about financial services, and we have done some regulatory reporting to someone that says, we made this decision based on the data at this point in time, we processed it at this point in time, and these are the the events from this point in time, right? Because actually we might look at that data, we might process that data later and get a different view of the data because there's been further data which overrode essentially the new records, which basically replaced. They didn't actually replace, but they they happened later and corrected a previous problem. So I do think bitemporality is important for kind of historical analysis. I do also think that there's an element of there's scenarios where you might go, actually, I just want to see how I'm doing today in my sales or customer churn or whatever it is against Thursday, against every Thursday all of history, right? And in that case, we may, bitemporality is kind of maybe important for the historical analysis, but for the view of today, actually, I don't care, right? Because I just want to know what the scenario is now, or what the scenario was an hour ago. And so when I read about bitemporality, I think it's important for historical analysis, and it's important to have essentially snapshots, right? We can go back at a point in time and go, what did this look like? How, what was the data like at this point in time versus when we processed it? I think that's important, but it's not important for every type of analysis and every type of reporting. Yeah, so that's kind of a long-winded sort of my thoughts.
No, well, you gave the super nerd description, and I think that's super helpful. Let me see if I can give the super not as smart as Andy answer to the same question, because I think let me underscore what you said a second ago, right? What you said a second ago was super key, right? Is the idea that you wouldn't necessarily need to apply this to every data product or solution.
100%. I think
and that's really important. But when I sat back and I thought about this for a little bit, right? So one is I am used to seeing data sets. We always record when we bring it in. There's a timestamp, there's an audit. This is, hold on a second. There's two things you have to consider. One is when that event or when that data was created in the original system, and when you brought it in, right? So there's two time elements you're looking at. I will say because I went out and did some research on bitemporal data and approaches and so forth. There are a couple of different views on this, right? There's another view that doesn't talk about necessarily when it occurred versus when you brought it in. There's another view on this that says what you're really looking at is when the data is actually changed versus over a course of two different timelines. Anyway, it's a fascinating topic to study, and if you're a data scientist, I suspect you're already an expert on that. But if we pull it all together, here's what we're saying. One is we are this data quantum or this data product. We're trying to deliver it to a number of different personas. Different people have different needs for the data sets, right? You're not going to be able to predict who wants what. I think we in the book they talk about some people that are building dashboards are looking for data sets organized in a certain way. People that are building machine learning engines are looking for data sets maybe in a column or file and so forth, or people that are doing other types of activities. So everybody's looking for data, the same data organized in a different way. That's this notion of multimodal access. Then it says in order for us to, if we want to really deliver rich data over a period of time, if we think that that's going to be a need for the future, it may not be your need today, you should start thinking about how to collect all these different data sets, right? Does it mean you record every single data product? Maybe. Some data products might be refreshed 10 times a day. Do you record it 10 times a day? I don't know. That sounds expensive. Maybe. But the idea that you should think about this notion of storing these data products over a period of time is something you should ask yourself. And the last piece is if our data product is immutable, right? That means we shouldn't take a data product and then change it downstream, right? That's something I'm against as well, right? Every data product is read-only, right? You take a data product, you deliver it. When somebody downstream starts changing the data, you're violating that lineage, if you will. All of a sudden, whatever the source said isn't true anymore because you've altered the outcome, so to speak. So we have to be careful about what we do with that data as it cuts across. Let me go to the next slide because the same topics we're going to kind of continue to dive into. And now we're looking at a data product and we're trying to understand how data comes in, the control points, the output data ports, as well as how data products fit together. this is a slide I think we're going to talk a bit about, because as you know, Andy, I disagree with this approach. Now I'll explain why in a second, but let me just first kind of take the audience to the top right, right? Here the idea is that we want to build data products, and I love that very first statement at the across the top. And I've got my screen cover. I'm going to move it over here. There you go. Right. The implication of this concept is that a data product, you can build a single data product from multiple sources, right? I know that I've seen some data products that are built from a single source. Nothing wrong with it. I guess it's okay. It works. Hey, you're happy. But I think the real value of the data product is when you're building a data product, it's the output of, you got a source in the cloud, a source on premise, a source across two clouds. When that data product is the output of multiple sources in many different environments, then you're truly exploiting the value of the mesh. Because if somebody were trying to build that data product on their own using a traditional data pipeline, you know the pain to do that. But you're giving it to them quickly with the least amount of friction as possible. And then the bottom part here, Andy, we're talking about and this is where I'm going to chime in a little bit on my disagreement. This is so important. The tight coupling between the data product and the source is so important. And so I agree with that paragraph and the way it's described. I think that's absolutely correct. What I disagree with is when we sometimes start to take other data products to build new data products. We have this kind of parent-child relationship. These data products are used to create this data product, and then that data product connects with three other data products to create another data product. And you create this web, if you will, of children, of parent data products, of parent data products. That for me, and I feel like I'm on a rant here, but that for me creates a lot of complexity, right? Because for an auditor trying to track what happened with all those data products, it's difficult. If anything happens to any one of those dependent data products, you're in trouble, right? I love creating a data product that stands alone, that only gets data from the source. I know in our solution in Starburst, that's what we do. That's easy to do with us. It doesn't cost you no more money. But when you can do it that way, you're not worried about all those 10-step dependencies, right? You're only worried about managing data at the source. Anyway, let me get off my rant, Andy. What say you?
You've covered a lot of things there, by the way.
I'm sorry.
I want to come back to
I felt very passionate.
No, that's fine. But I want to come back to your ranting bit, because I want to just touch on the implication of the design can span one or multiple physical infrastructures. And I think this is really important, actually. And if I tie this back to some of the other parts of the book, when I think about data products, and we talked about this a bit, I think, there are three different types of data product referenced in the book. There's source aligned, consumer aligned, and aggregate. And if I think about source aligned data products, I think that they are data products that are essentially aligned to the source system, right? So actually, what you probably want is some sort of, and this is my interpretation, you want some sort of automation that basically says, for the data artifacts in this system, build me some data products, right? And just literally like that. And you're going to automatically generate a bunch of what I would call source aligned data products. So these are data products that point to one source system that have maybe some very simplistic technical metadata around them that you can then go in and augment with, more useful metadata, more business metadata, if you will. But then actually the real value is in what I would call the consumer aligned data products, which is where actually you're starting to build data products that span multiple environments. And that I think is really important when we talk about this, multi-cloud, on-prem, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we're in broad agreement there, but then I think, and this is where we have our sort of different view. My view is that you build those consumer aligned data products on the output of the source aligned data product, and that's kind of how I view the world. And so I kind of think that we're going to have at least two levels of data product. We're going to have the operational, the analytic infrastructure, whatever, the data systems. We're going to have one layer, which is the source aligned data products. And then on top of those, we're going to have the consumer aligned data products, which can make use of the any transformations or cleansing or anything that we might have, or any metadata that we might have put in the source aligned ones. So that's kind of my view. Now, I do take your point on lineage and understanding kind of the flow of data. And I to be honest, I think that's a tooling problem. at this point. I think once we have the tooling to solve that, I actually think that I think we get to a maybe more of an easier scaling sort of problem, right? Where actually it becomes easy just to consume one data product into another, and then build the chain. And we've got lineage and we've got versioning and things. The one thing that I would probably, so I kind of disagree with you a bit, but when we got tooling, maybe we'll come a bit closer together. But the one thing that I will highlight on this is data contract. All right, there's this thing about the operational data contract between the source and the data product is often tightly coupled. And there's a lot of material in LinkedIn about data contracts at the moment. And I must confess, I've blown in the wind a little bit on data contracts. And I thought, actually, that is something that we technically need. And then I've gone back to, no, I don't think this is relevant. But actually, if we think about, the way that we're supposed to organize ourselves in data mesh, we're supposed to have people in a domain who are responsible for the ingestion, transformation, and serving of the data. I start to wonder why we need a technical solution or any solution around data contracts. And the reason I say that is because your first level of consumers are probably in your domain. And so why don't they just go and talk to the other people in the domain, right? To kind of say, actually, this isn't quite what I want, right? This is still within the domain before we actually publish anything. And also the producers of the data are in the domain. So they can go over to the consumers, the first people, that consume data, and say, I'm going to remove this column. How's that for you? Right. And basically, it's a collaborative thing that happens between people having a conversation rather than us trying to have a technical solution to kind of somehow say, oh, this thing is changing. You, Mr. Person downstream who uses this, you should be aware that this is changing. When are you going to make your changes? And that kind of technology, I don't know how this even would work, sort of technology exchange to go back and forth to make sure that we're all in alignment. It feels like a conversation would be easier.
Yeah. And let me just add, because I don't want to make sure I don't get any hate texts or hate LinkedIn messages. I have had that conversation with a lot of smart people, and I don't always win the argument. I know there are great cases where that makes sense, right? This idea, there are domains where you think about these data products as building blocks, and so these data products form a foundation, and we update these all the time. They're the foundation. And I have another team that takes that foundation and they turn this into layer 2, like you were describing, right? And they do this with those data products. And then I have a third team that takes that layer 2. So you must think about it as a building, and they're the ones that are creating and actions and insights, so to speak. And so in a model like that, that's strict and stable and well governed, I guess that makes sense, right? Because you got almost a supply chain type model where everybody is working at a different type of data products, and they understand the dependencies and the responsibilities. That makes a lot of sense. I get that, right? I'm just saying, it doesn't always have to be that way. In other domains where you lack that governance or lack that kind of rigor, so to speak, at least in the Starburst, if somebody says, I like those 3 data products, if only I could combine pieces from them, I lean forward and say, just copy the query into a new data product and then edit it as you want, and you've got your own data product, no matter what they ever do with theirs. So I think you need to make sure that you balance that approach. You don't always have to build them off one another. Sometimes it makes sense to go right to the source. Doesn't cost you no more money. Why not? So great. Let's go to the next one here.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to write an article or a blog on this with you later, Andy, because to me, when I kind of walk through this screams to me. I always talk about a data product. I think about total cost of ownership. I think about optimizing performance, and I think about optimizing risk. And so there are many ways to build a data product, as we know. And we're trying to be kind of fairly neutral in our discussion here for the book club. Yes. But this matters, right? How you build a data product matters. I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to go too far, but maybe I should. I don't know. Andy, what do you think? There's a 3 key piece here, right? Let me not steal your thunder here. Let me let you talk a bit about your favorite parts.
Well, you skipped a forward. Sorry, there was some other bits and pieces that we might have covered in between, so that's why I'm furiously flipping pages. So what do I? Well, let
me help you out while you're flipping the pages.
Okay. I'm sorry.
So this first part, right? The build time artifacts, right? So I look at that, and the book does the first thing the book says is code, right? For me, I think about that. That's the federated query we create that's going to actually create the data product, right? It's going to bring the data in, right? That middle part, the transformation execution, right? Whether it's a batch, execution, or whether it's you run it, whenever the person clicks a button, but at some point you're executing that code to bring the data in, and you're doing something with it. You're joining tables, you're organizing data sets, you're executing a specific transformation of the data you brought in into the data product. And then there certainly is a notion of temporary storage. You don't want to run it every time. Sometimes the data product has a life, and you can say, I only need to run it once a day or once a week or once an hour, whatever it is. There's a notion of, I know for us in Starburst, it's kind of in memory storage and so forth. We want to store it temporarily. And so those are the basic fundamentals. How you do that matters. If you do that the wrong way, your costs are going to go way up, right? And so you have to be able to optimize risk, performance, and cost.
Yes. Yeah. I guess my observation on this picture, actually, I must confess, I found this quite confusing, because this is called a data product container, and but it's the same like hexagonal shape as a data quantum, which is basically a data product, right? It's the smallest kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Indivisible component of a data mesh architecture. And so I did look at this and I was like, well, what is a data product container? So that's my first observation, right? This is, I think, I hope Jean-Marc's not listening, but I think this is confusing. The second thing is exactly kind of what you said. This sort of starts to be sort of much more implementation, right? So when we talk about data products, there's 101 different definitions of what a data product is. This, I think, is quite an interesting picture, because in the book, because this is the first time that we start getting down to sort of what I would call sort of more physical implementation, right? We've got some storage, we've got an execution engine, we've got the transformation. And actually, I concur with what you said. I would just extend it that when I think about data products, and I say this often, I think about it as a text file, right? And the text file is, give me an execution engine, right? So we've got in the middle. Run me some code. That's the transformation piece. Generate me some data, which lives somewhere. I don't actually care if it's temporary storage or domain data or somewhere else. And then do some other things, right? Like security and cataloging. But this to me is a representation of that kind of view of the world. Yeah, and it's just my observation when I looked at this, and I've found my notes in the book, was wow, what is this compared to a product, a data product or a data quantum? And it's what you said. This starts getting into more physical implementation aspects of a data product.
Yeah. Indeed.
So that's I'm not sure that's added much, but I'm trying to sort of clarify the picture.
Well, that's a good point. I actually hadn't thought, and as you started talking, I was like, I never caught that. This is a container. What's the difference? So yeah. I think that was helpful. Yeah, this is a good chapter. There's a lot in chapter 13. Let's kind of and that's the last one for chapter 13. Let's go into chapter 14. There was quite a bit there, and maybe there's time to go back and cover some more if we have time. But let's jump into chapter. Oh, sorry, this is chapter 13. Yeah, I copied this quote here because I think it's really important, right? This is kind of in the middle of the chapter, if I remember correctly. I think it's my notes say it's page 238. So we're getting closer to the end of this part, but we can build all the data products we want. And this is part of the reason I think why data mesh is so powerful, is because you have consumers that know, so data product owners, domain owners, people that are business intimate, or people that understand the analytics problems for their specific domain. They're the ones that are curating data products and building data products. If you're going to trust a product, it's because you trust the teams that are putting them together, right? And if you know that the person that's in charge of that domain, or the team that's building data products, or the person that owns the data products understands your analytics purpose, understands your business objectives, you're going to trust, right? And I think this is a really important piece of the whole making that all work. We talk about, you'll hear that data mesh is a lot more organizational, a lot more people than technical. This is a big part of it, is building that trust. I don't think that trust comes overnight. I think you got to work towards it. But I think part of the building that trust starts with giving people control, empowering people to do more themselves. You trust yourself first, and then you trust people you work with second. And you may not trust the IT architect you've never met before, but you're going to trust the product owner you work with for a number of years. So anyway, not to harp too much on this concept, but I think it's an important point. So I wanted to pull that out.
But before you move off that, if we can just go back to it for one moment, I think there's something that I just wanted to pull out, right? So the second sentence here is interesting, right? So what are the characteristics? Well, the essential characteristics that people are going to look at to figure out if the data is trustworthy. And then it mentions data quality, which we're all aware of. There's tools. That's a relatively well solved problem, right? Levels of maturity, conformance to standards, and temporal characteristics, which starts getting us back to a little bit about temporality, but also things like service levels, etc., etc. What's not mentioned on here is the last one, which is user-driven metrics, right? Which actually I think is the most important one. So, can we trust something that's being used by a larger number of people than something that's being used by a smaller number of people? And I think that's something that's again different about data mesh to things like warehouses and lakes and other approaches, is that it's like the wisdom of the crowd or whatever, right? So the more people that are using something, the more likely it is to be correct, and therefore the more likely we can trust it. And I think that's kind of important. I think that's kind of just an important sort of observation. It's not mentioned on this sentence, unfortunately. It is mentioned. There's a section on it in the book on like the next page or whatever. But I just think it's really interesting and it's different because data
Powerful.
quality, et cetera, we've monitored and measured, but not usage as much. So
I know in our data products in our tool, there's a screen when you click on a data product, it'll show you how many times it's been used. You can also see who else is using it. And there's also a quality reference to show you what actual consumers think of the quality of the data in the product. Those two are powerful because it's not somebody unknown to you telling you what they think of the data product. It's people that are actually using it. You open a data product and it's been used 6 times this day by these people that you know or the people that you trust. It also adds to your trust. Yeah, it's a good point, Andy. It's good stuff. We got 2 images here. I put them side by side because I think they're both telling the same story. Kind of going back to what you said a second ago about the metrics. The picture on the left, I kind of carve it up into, you have to kind of picture 3 areas here, right? The area across the top is kind of that consumer area, if you will. And it's how we might measure or how we would observe, right? And how a user is using a data product. Bar Moses, if you're listening, observability is important for sure. On the bottom left, we're talking about there are auditors, there are teams that are actually actively monitoring not which consumer is using it, where the data is coming from, and there are metrics that are associated with not just how a consumer discovers it, but overall discovering how it's being used across the enterprise, right? And then the other, on the far bottom right-hand corner, you start looking at the output, right? So it's not just monitoring from a consumer perspective or monitoring from an enterprise perspective, but now so you're also starting to think about where it's going, right? And so there's metrics about on the outside, how it's actually being consumed. Is it being consumed successfully? Are there any issues with uptime or downtime, standard reliability? But there are metrics associated with just the actual usability on the outside. So there's a lot to uncover there, and there's some overlap there as well. So when I looked at the picture, I started for a while and I was like, a lot of these concepts are kind of the same. We're overlapping. But what I took away from it, Andy, was we want to make sure that we have metrics that we're using to measure the performance of a data product.
Yes. I would concur with that. I think if you remember when you asked me about I can't remember which slide it was, or which chapter, but which things I thought were important in the process, and I said discovery I thought was important. This actually unpacks that a little bit, right? One of the things that I think is interesting when people talk about data mesh is how they actually discover stuff. And I know that Zhamak has got, we talked about this on the previous one, you've got the mesh experience plane and you've got the data product plane or experience plane, right? And basically the mesh experience plane, it's got this weird thing in it because for the most part, the mesh experience plane is aimed at basically people who are managing your data mesh. But there's this thing called searching, right? And that's in the mesh experience. So essentially what this sort of, to me, depicts is that in that mesh experience plane, you have the capability to find something, a data product, right? But actually, you then move to the other plane, and this is, I haven't figured out how this works technically. I've not seen anyone do this from a technology perspective, have two separate planes like this, but you move to the other plane, the data product experience plane, to then kind of do discovery within the data product to find out like the metrics that you described, right? To find out the more information, how trustworthy it is, et cetera, et cetera. And so the picture 13.1 is interesting. I'm not entirely sure anyone's ever going to do this because, these are two separate, in my opinion anyway, two separate user interfaces for two separate sets of people. And actually, it's likely you're going to look in the mesh to find a data product. When you found the data product, you're then going to look into the data product to find the information about it, including metrics, etc. So that's just my kind of interpretation of that. So I think that's kind of a bit weird. But
that's interesting. I want to highlight something. So when I looked at it, I was talking, my description was talking about as a data mesh owner or as a CDO, sitting back and looking across all the metrics for each of these areas, right? How are my consumers using the mesh and products? How, so if from an individual persona or consumer perspective, and then from a security perspective across the enterprise, what things should I be looking for? And that's what the audit is what triggered me there. And the right side, looking at where they're being used. So from overall end-to-end management, and then you described it rightfully so, I think, and actually, even probably more accurate to the picture is like, well, hold on a second. The top, we're just talking about discovering across the mesh. On the left, we're talking about a user discovering a specific data product. I don't care about the old mesh. All I care about is that specific data product. And on the right side, bottom right side, we're looking more so specifically about discovering how data products are being used for an output or consumer purpose. So I think I actually like your interpretation better. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. But I actually, you just said something interesting, which is I've got a CDO who's kind of sitting back and wants to see kind of the data product metrics across the mesh. And actually, there's nothing in the book that describes how you would do that, because you've got two different experience planes, you've got two different sets of interfaces. So that's an interesting thought, that maybe there is a gap there to how would, I could think about how you would actually make that work. You may have, may make lots of API calls from one plane to another, but that seems that seems like sort of unnecessary and unwieldy. But there's something there that I think we probably need to think about and discuss a bit further, maybe when we've got more time. Should we move to the right hand side, because I'm always conscious of time. So I think this piece is really interesting, right? This self-registration. So what we're basically saying is the data product. You build a data product kind of over here somewhere. Look at the camera. Over here somewhere, and you sort of press a button somehow, and it goes, "Oh, I'm here," to the experience plans, and then you can then discover it from the experience plans. I must confess, I think that's this starts getting back to things like enterprise service buses and that whole microservice thing that people attempted around data, in my experience anyway, probably in the early mid 2000s, and it didn't really go anywhere. I think that what we're going to end up with is very much you use the data product experience plane to build the data products, and then because you're already using that experience plane, when you publish them or whatever you want to call it, then they are actually already registered in the experience plane. I'm not sure. There are companies out there, and I'm thinking of banks and retailers and telecom companies and that are going to have loads of software engineers that are going to build something which kind of then self-registers itself against some other system or discovery catalog or whatever. That feels like it's just not going to happen. So I look at this and I think this is something that you might get a large team of consultants to come in and build for you. I'm not sure this is something that we're ever gonna see off-the-shelf software, because it's kind of unnecessarily complex, right? To have a data product register itself with something when you could just use the data product experience plane to build the data product. That's kind of my thought on this. I'm going off on a limb.
I'm trying to say, gosh, because the idea of one is, I feel like we're gonna go down this longer discussion, but I'll say one thing. Yes. One is where you register, I think, is really important. I would love the ability to self-register or register in an enterprise catalog, so everybody has the ability to see what I've created.
Right.
I don't know whether it's self-registration or I'm
Hmm.
not sure what, it's just, they need to be registered in a
Hmm.
catalog where they can be visible and used. The other
Hmm.
concept there, and I wanted to bring this quote in because it's on page 241. They're talking about exploring the shape of data. I'm not, for when I read that subtitle, I was like, what does that mean? And I got into the paragraph, I'm like, oh, I love it. Because we believe this, right? I know we make this available in our tool. So it's the idea of being able to go to a catalog and seeing every data product. Right now, do
Hmm.
you have access to the raw data and every data product? Can you actually start to use it? No. But the ability to allow consumers to see every data product and then read a description or a purpose or understand where the data came from and then make a decision, I need that or I don't need that. That's tremendous. Because if they need it, they might click on it, realize they can't see any of the data because they don't have access, then they can go get permission for it. But
Hmm.
it saves them so much time. If we've been on the two sides of the other of that problem, where as a consumer, if you're having to ask for something and then you get it and it's wrong, you ask for something else, you get it and it's wrong, it's crazy, right? And so frictionless, right? I can read all my data products, I know who's using them, I know what the purpose is, I know where it came from, I know at a high level what's in it without seeing the raw data, and I decide that I actually want it, I make a request, I get it, and I start to use it. And so I love that idea of being able to self-register. Everybody can see it. They use, and before they use it, they have to make sure they get permission. Got it. The other piece I want to cover is this sidecar piece. You mentioned it earlier, and you were talking about this idea. I said, hey, we need to start to allow people to do more on their own, right? The value of the data product
Hmm.
is not to overly micromanage them, is to let people start to use them. And you brought up a really good point to say, hold on a second, the only way that works is if we can build some of this federated computational governance into it. And so you've
Hmm.
got the controls built in, but it's frictionless for the user because they don't see it, so to speak. And this sidecar concept is brought up early in the book. And early in the book, it's complicated. I mean, Jean-Marc hits us with sidecar from the very beginning. And for those of us reading the book for the first time, is like, what? Sidecar? It seems like a crazy concept. But as you get further in the book, and certainly by this point in the book, you start to appreciate how this idea of some code or some computational capability tied into every data product, providing a consistent level of governance is pretty powerful. It could be pretty useful. That was the word I'm looking for. It's a strong capability, I'll say it that way. But anyway,
Yeah.
I like how this builds into that concept.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And I think when we talked about sidecars before, I think about sidecars as you said, it's kind of standardized capability, templated, whatever functions that you can just call, and then they just do stuff, and you don't have to worry or care.
We had a question on
So,
federated governance, Andy. So we'll
oh,
come back to that in a second. But for the person that asked the question, the
mhm.
sidecar concept is one way to think about that is building that automated or computational governance into the process. How do you do
Yep,
that? It's not easy to do yet, right? We're getting there.
yep.
Hey,
Do we
I
want to
took
do
this.
questions, or do we want to carry on through and then get questions at
I
the
think
end?
we'll go through another 2 minutes,
Okay,
finish this last chapter, and then we'll
okay,
go through it.
okay.
Copy this quote. I think it's it kind of summarizes what we've been talking about, right? Once again, we're talking about running without friction, with limited, and I should have just highlighted that third sentence, right? Run without friction and with limited impact on other data products, right? Data mesh's promise of scale can be fulfilled only if, right? And so if we want to scale, we need to be sure that we are managing the dependencies, limited impact on the data products, which is why I don't like to combine them. You can do it
Mhm.
if you want to, do it when you need to. But anyway, I thought that's kind of set the summary really well.
Yeah, so I just on that, I would agree with that. And that, so when people, if people have heard me talk about data products, I always include the fact that you need to make a request for some computers, and that's because you want to have limited impact on other data products, right? You're asking for some computers to do a thing, and then those computers go away once you've done the thing. You're not asked if you're sharing computers with other people, then you potentially have quite a significant impact on other data products.
Yeah.
So that's why one of the, if you hear me talk about data products, that's kind of one of the things that I think is quite important. But anyway, that's me. I'll just stop
Love
there.
it, love it. And I think this is our last slide before we'll go into Q&A. If I'm not mistaken. And we have two more.
Okay.
Yeah, this is, I mean, I think we've been talking about a lot of these different pieces quite a bit already. Once again, this is a focus on the life cycle of a data product and all the interactions a data product is going to have, certainly from source all the way through consumer. Just a couple of things I'll highlight, and then see, Andy, if there's anything else you want to add to it, and then we'll go to the last slide. One of them is this notion of this data product URI. I haven't, maybe I should, I haven't used that before. This, but let me say I haven't used the term URI, but this is absolutely true. I mean, I see this in practice. I think every data product needs a unique identifier. You need to be able to point to the data product you use. And as the data product changes, whether you call that version or anything else, it needs to have a unique identifier. So we see that in practice all the time. Maybe I start using the word URI a bit more if I want to be absolutely correct. This notion of kind of service level objectives or service level agreement SLAs, we spent a lot of time talking about that in different workshops on whether or not for a particular domain, whether we need to apply SLAs. My general experience is that early on in data mesh journeys, it's not where I start, right? I'm not ready to really build an SLA because we don't know enough about the environment to really make any commitments. I think when you get started with an MVP or a journey, I think you might have an ambition or a vision for what SLA you'd like, and then you build up towards it. I think it's a great idea. I don't know that you necessarily need to have this in every domain when you get started. As we get more mature into our data mesh journeys, absolutely, right? Your consumer should have an expectation for a service level for any particular data product they're getting. That starts with change, reliability, access, quality, all those characteristics we've been talking about. I'll stop there because I think those are probably the highlights for me. Was there anything else, Andy, you want to add to this?
No, not really. I tend to see these manifest components personally. I think they are part of the data product. So where it's got data product source artifacts and it's got data product manifest, I sort of collapse the two into one. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that's kind of how I view them. And then things like local policies, for example, locality or confidentiality, that sort of stuff. That feels like that's just part of the data product metadata. The URI, as you said, is important. It's the SLOs. I think it's important to report those if you need them. The whole concept of output ports is probably another discussion for another day. I think I'm not sure that technically there is a solution out there, or even a combination of solutions that really does output ports in the way that is described in the book. But that's maybe a discussion for another day.
Yeah. All right, let's go. Governance, more governance. Let me. Let me let Andy open up this one. I feel like I've been opening up every slide. Any strong thoughts on this image?
So I look at this. This is the I've read this a long time ago. This is about I look at this image, and from memory, this was around policies to do with kind of security and the right to be forgotten and that sort of thing. So where we have these embedded policies that are part, in my opinion, just part of a sidecar. Again, they've been pulled out as an embedded policy in this picture, but I just view them as basically part of the data product itself. They're declarative statements. Perhaps the data within this data product needs to be, we need to have some mechanism of removing the data. Now, when we say removing the data, right, we can't just willy-nilly go and remove a record. So, someone comes along and says, I want you to remove all traces of me from your data platform. The reality is that if we tried to do that, we would probably cause ourselves a lot of difficulty and maybe even break some of our platform, right? Because if I say to a bank or a marketing agency or someone, remove all traces of me, my customer record may be a really simple thing, but then you've got to remove all the behavioral aspects that you've caught about me, my website traffic, all the clicks that I've made. You've got to move all my transaction-like data, et cetera, et cetera. And then if we go back to bitemporality and we go, at this point in time, the number was 50, right? And when we processed it, we processed it a week later, actually that number was 10. Well, what happened between then and now? Well, Andy requested that he be forgotten. And now all of our number of transactions is different. but actually it wasn't different at a point in time, right? And so now we get into a point of quite, inconsistency. So what you probably do in that case, and I'm apologies if I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole here a little bit, but what you probably do in that case is you probably keep my customer record, right? But you just remove the fact that it's associated to me. So there is a customer there who is completely anonymous, and we keep all the behavioral data about the way that, that customer behaved, but we remove any linkage to me. And so what we probably want in our data product, in our central enablement team, we probably want them to build maybe some sort of user-defined function or whatever it is, remove Andy, or remove a customer, I should say. And when we call that with a particular customer key, it actually goes away and does the processing we want. It doesn't remove records. It goes away and removes the fact that it's Andy, maybe hashes out Andy and the any PII related data. So that's kind of what, when I see this, that's kind of what I'm thinking about in my head, is those scenarios where we want to be able to do that across a load of different data products.
Well, let's answer some questions. One of them is on federated governance, and so I think it's a great way to answer it. And we got a couple questions there, so maybe we'll do a little bit of fast shooting on them. But I think the first question on federated governance, I'll answer that one, and then I'll let you get the next one, Andy.
Okay.
Here's what I would say. One is the value of federated governance is being able to build a domain that's fit for purpose, i.e., you may have one domain with so you say every domain in my data mesh is going to have this level of governance. There's a minimum standard that is going to be delivered everywhere. And then you might say this domain, that's all it needs, because we want to keep it very open. They're an discovery domain or an ideation domain. I want them to run very, very quickly with very low governance. So they're going to get the minimum, right? And maybe what they actually do with the data, and maybe they're not able to publish it, but they're all about discovery. And over here, I have a domain that's publishing financial reports or dealing with customer data or dealing with patient data, high governance. They take the minimum governance and apply more on top of it. And so that's the idea of federated governance in a domain. You can also apply that same concept to data products. Within a domain, you might have some data products that are locked down based on the data that it contains, and other data products that are more open. So federated governance can be applied at a domain level and also a data product level. That's the easy answer. The hard answer is then, how the heck do I do it? If you want to Google sidecar and figure out who's doing this, you might be disappointed, right? Because this is conceptual still. I think there are organizations trying to figure out how to do this and how to apply this. But the reality is, within every one of our organizations today, our control tools and technologies are diverse. We have so many different places where we're building controls, different access systems, and so forth. Doing this is difficult. Absolutely the right concept, right? To be able to rely on code in a data product or code in a domain to do it. I think that's where we want to go. We're not all the way there yet. Let's reach out for a one-to-one, and we can talk about what is working there. But I do think there's some small steps you can take to start to get there today, just on the access management side. Andy, there's a question here on.
Which one?
I want to answer this one here about prerequisites to data mesh. I want to cover that one. There's one here about assigning the ownership and accountability for the success of a data mesh. How to assign the ownership and accountability for the success of a data mesh. That's an interesting question.
Yeah, so I don't think you do assign ownership and accountability for the success of data mesh. I think what you do is you get executive sponsorship in an organization that you're going to start a data product journey. You build out a data product. You give ownership. Let's say you select finance as your domain. You give ownership to the CFO or the head of finance. They're going to be ultimately the person that is responsible for building the first data product. Obviously, they're not going to build it themselves. They're going to have data engineers or whatever analysts that help them build it. But essentially, you're decentralizing accountability, right? And so, when you put marketing and they're building their own data product, they're responsible and accountable for their data products. So ultimately, I would suggest that you are distributing accountability and reward for building data products, and so I don't think there is necessarily. I mean, this is a debate that Adrian and I have had a few times. You could argue that perhaps the CDO is ultimately responsible for the success or otherwise, but actually the kind of the nitty-gritty, the everyday implementation and design and all that sort of work is actually going to be down in the domains.
Yeah, I think you're on the. I mean, And then this will help me also answer that. There's another question here about what prerequisites must be in place before you start a data mesh. Look, in a perfect world, you've got perfect data governance, you've got perfect data quality, and all your stakeholders trust you and have confidence in their data. Raise your hand if you live in that world, right? I don't think there's going to be any hands that are raised. We're all struggling with every one of those elements. So I think the reality is we're already trying to deliver against the objectives of a mesh, which is that creating that frictionless delivery of valuable data to a customer. We're already trying to do that. So my advice is there are no prerequisites, right? Get started, right? I love the idea of a pathfinder where you learn what works and what doesn't work, right? You might decide you think your access rules aren't going to work, and then you do a pathfinder, you're like, you know what, they're good enough. You think your data quality is great, you do a pathfinder, you realize, I got some quality issues to fix. So I think the best way to discover and prioritize the big areas of challenge is to do a pathfinder, do an MVP, one domain, 6 data products, and then figure out which challenges are truly kind of hindering or truly the roadblocks, so to speak, for your success of a mesh. But you got to get started. If somebody says, let me go fix data governance first, you're never going to get there. And that's not, you can't go to the business and say, hey, guess what? I have this great idea for delivering value and data to you. Just give me 2 years to fix data governance. You'll be out of business, right? So get started, start delivering the data, and then figure out within a data mesh concept how you prioritize kind of fixing some of those areas. We're already over. I don't mind covering one more question, Andy. Maybe we just go ahead and say, forget the rules. Let's cover one more question. There's a question here about, can each data product be made autonomous? What would you say? Can each data product be made autonomous, Andy?
Yeah, kinda, maybe. So the reason I say that is because, and I'm going to reiterate, if I think about a data product being a declarative set of text, right, a declarative file that basically says, give me some computers, start the computers up, run me a compute engine, execute some code, then that's relatively autonomous, right? But where the data product, I think, cannot be autonomous is that then, in my eyes, what we then want to do is we want to say, here's the metadata around this, like the business metadata, the tags, whatever you want to call them, that I'm going to push into a catalog. So now I can discover this data product, right? So now it's not really autonomous. But then I think another piece might be policy as code, right? So I've got maybe ABAC or RBAC permission sets that I'm going to push it into a policy manager, right? And then I'm going to have some declarative statements that close down the infrastructure, and the kind of that process is finished. Then as an end user, when I come in to consume data, first thing I do is I log into the catalog, I look at the data products, I search for whatever, I find the data product is interesting based on those tags that have been pushed in there by the data product. I then access the data, and assuming I've got access, when I access that data, the policies in the policy manager, which were defined in the product, will then come into play. And so then I can exploit that data. So I think the kind of broadly the execution of a data product can be autonomous and standalone, but there are components that I believe you need in a mesh, such as policy management for security and discoverability through a catalog, that prevent me from saying yes, a data product can be fully autonomous. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I would have just said no. No. I think you're right. I think it's a tricky answer because what do you mean? It's a conversation, as you said. I think that our goal is to make sure that we enable the consumer to be able to use that data product in as many ways as possible. I think that we enable that data product owner, we afford them the ability to create their data product in a self-service manner with autonomy, so to speak. At the end of the day, though, the reality is data product comes from a bunch of different data sources with strong dependencies. So if you're saying, is it fully standalone? Kinda, right? You're still dependent on a number of backend sources to actually make it work, and data owners and other people. So it doesn't really fully stand alone, but if you build it right, you can deliver it in an autonomous way. So, hey, I think that was good. We got through that. When I first, we were over time, I'll just add a little bit of commentary. When I first read the chapter, between me and you, we both thought it was a little bit boring, but now that we talked through it, it wasn't so bad, actually. That there was more interest there than I thought.
You make everything fun. You make everything fun, Adrian. That's what it is.
Awesome. Hey, well, thank you everybody for another session. We appreciate the time. Thank you for the questions. We didn't get to all of them. We'll get to them on LinkedIn. come back and join us for the last part of this series, which is going to be really interesting when we get into the topic of execution. Andy, thank you. Cheers, my
Thank you
friend.
very much. Have a great day, everyone. Cheers. Bye.